Hello, my guest today is Karin Mitchell. Karin Mitchell was a journalist during the Boeremag trial. Karin, in 2011, you were a rookie journalist, as I was very many years ago, decades ago. And you were sent to attend the Boeremag trial, which by then had been running since 2008. And this was
2003.
2003. So this was 2011, so it was 8 years already ongoing in the trial. Right. Tell us, what was your impression? Because you managed, I don't know how, but you managed to secure an interview with one of the accused in prison. And this was Superintendent Tolly Vreugdenburg's case.
Yes.
Before we start with that, what did you think of Superintendent Tolly Vreugdenburg?
I was absolutely terrified of him.
I would be too.
Just judging from his sheer height, and he was dressed in a suit, and I asked him something about where I needed to be, and he was very, let's say, blunt.
Intimidating.
Yes, and so I decided that I would never talk to him again while on the case, which changed many years later.
Good, because okay, so tell us about these men. You know, if you think of the concept of a terrorist,
yes,
then you would think of somebody in a camouflage uniform, black camera on his face and rifle, automatic rifle in his hand, an AK. So who were they?
So when I was deployed to the case, I remember I was working the weekend shift at my radio offices still, and it was the Sunday night at 7 o'clock, and the diary came through for the next day. And I got deployed to the Boeremag trial because I had never been in a court case. I needed to understand the formalities, like you need to stand up when the judge enters the courtroom. I needed to get the grasp of all of those tiny things. And they thought, let's send you to this case that had been ongoing for 8 years. There are no more journalists covering it. You go in, you go get comfortable. And of course, I was like, this is massive. I had been an intern for, I think, 2 months. And so I read up on the Boeremag the entire night. I was so stressed. And I remember I was upstairs in the little cafe of the North Gauteng High Court, and suddenly I just heard the sirens of the Casper or the Nyala band coming down with all of the Boeremag. And I was immediately taken aback, and I ran downstairs, needed to put my things through the X-ray scanners. And the second I saw them, they were absolutely normal men. They were in checkered shirts, they had beards that had grown, their hair had become longer, pretty much unkempt, but because they had been in prison for so long, but they definitely didn't look like what you would imagine a terrorist to be.
Superintendent Vreugdenburg told us, one of them was a professor in philosophy, engineers, and etc. And who did you manage to get an interview with in prison?
So at that time, I had been in court, I believe, for about a month every single day already. And I went to the front of the dock before Judge Eben Jordan came into the courtroom, and I was taking photos of the men in the dock with my iPhone. And I was standing to the right, so from accused number 1 all the way to 23. I was on this side. I took a photo, and accused number 1 afterwards asked me, "Are you taking a photo with a cell phone?" I said, "Yes." And I turned it around, and he said, "But where are the buttons?" And it was literally just a second of, you haven't seen a cell phone since 2002. There weren't touch screens back then. And so I showed it to him, and the next day I went back and just said, "Hello, how are you doing?" Because obviously I wanted a scoop. I was a new journalist. I wanted to get something extra. And so I would just keep going and saying hello to Mike de Toy, who was accused number 1. And as Tolly mentioned, the first leader of the first phase of the Boeremag. And then I said, "Is there any way that I can come and visit you in prison to hear about the Boeremag side of life in prison?" That was absolutely what it was. And the next day, when I walked into court, his lawyer came over and he handed me a note that had been folded. And at that second, Judge Eben Jordan came into the court, and I needed to do the formalities, and I couldn't open the letter. And as soon as I sat down, I unfolded it, and Mike said, "Hello, Karin, you are more than welcome to come and visit me in prison this weekend." He gave me his prisoner number, and that was still at Pretoria Central. And I walked in there on a Sunday to go and visit him, and I continued doing that from 2011 until 2017 was the last visit. And at some stage, it was every Sunday.
And you got to know the men and their families.
Yes.
And what impact did this, when we spoke in our interview with Superintendent Fruitenberg about Senior Van Rensburg and the ideology,
Mm-hmm.
and these men would discuss this, and they would recruit, etc., and the lower people were not aware of the intentions of the people high up in the echelons.
Yes.
But also, what about their families? Because, often we forget, we focus so much on this aspect that these people have extended families. What happened? What is the greater community feeling?
So that was something that I realized very early on. And that was from that night when I started to do the research, because I went to several articles to try and piece together the story, because there wasn't one comprehensive story on the Boeremag. And so I was reading through everything, and in a lot of the articles it said, this accused had a baby who was 1 month old at the time of his arrest. This person had 4 children. So everybody had their own stories. And that was what fascinated me, is everybody was being judged for the actions of their fathers and their brothers and their uncles, whereas there are people suffering from all of these men who are now in prison. And that's when when I was in prison, I asked Mike eventually, because I wanted to respect the space of family. But then I said, will you tell me about your children? And his child was actually, his last born was born just after his arrest. And by that time, he had been in prison for 11 years. So he didn't see her grow up. She did not have a father. And she had to grow up without a father. And so he invited me to a family day many years later, very excited, because then their families can come to prison and it's a very relaxed day. And that was the first time that I could see Mike outside of a correctional facility, just being casual with his family. And his daughter was there. His daughter would be somebody who I would have been friends with in university. It's absolutely normal people. But everybody was still, the Boeremag word lingered in their families.
It reminds me, there is a Netflix show called Ordinary Men,
Mm-hmm.
and it's based upon a book. And this is about the Nazi police unit,
Mm-hmm.
and they were men that weren't conscripted into the army, but they were a police unit, and it was their job to shoot thousands of Jews face to face. And it's extraordinary how plain ordinary men, plumbers and this and that, etc., could get to that point, mm-hmm. where this was their daily job. Some of them refused because they didn't have to do it. But some of them carried on, and they did it, and it just became their job. And as a psychologist, to me, it's very interesting that what we think, what we feel, and what we do, all of those three, they're connected. But the strongest one is what we do. And this is how we recruit boy soldiers as well. The moment there is an action, then what you think about it, you will rationalize it, and your feelings will follow.
Mm-hmm.
And did you experience that with some of these men? I don't know if you also met some of those that were in the lower echelons, the bomb planters, etc.
Mm-hmm.
That they totally believed this ideology, and the moment that they detonate bombs,
they're part of it. So this was actually while I went to visit Mike during the first visit, and just before he came to the visiting booths, Rudy Gous walked past on the other side to meet with his father, and we gave a quick wave because he recognized me from court. And Rudy was always one of those people who just, when I looked at him, it felt as if he didn't belong there. And I think he just got swept up in it. And yeah, I think he was literally wrong place, wrong time, but he got involved. And as you said, your actions lead to it. And it was just a few months ago, I realized that the Boeremag had actually planted an arms cache somewhere else. And I have been working on this story for years, and I didn't even know about it. And that's how this case works, is there's so many details that just emerge. But from that, Herman and Rudy, who were part of the final group, the final group who were fugitives that fled across the country. He basically, so they escaped, they were in prison for about 2 years, and they escaped custody. And they went and they planted this arms cache. So you have already been in prison for so many years. And the second I realized this, it made sense that obviously they were still convinced that ideology was still sitting there. And for me, I thought Rudy should not be here, but the ideology was there.
And rearrested by superintendent. Why did they think they could get away with it?
Exactly. But they were gone for quite a while. Yes, exactly. He always catches.
Yes. And if you would just look at these men, would you consider walking the street? Would you think that they are dangerous men? Intimidating, like Superintendent Treason?
Absolutely not. No, I mean, this was obviously about 8 years into the trial, so some of them were already a bit older. Yes, they were a bit older already, but the younger guys, no, they were absolutely normal men. There was nobody that had looked intimidating or who I was scared of.
Ordinary men.
Yes.
Ordinary men. Very much like the serial killers. Ordinary men.
Mm.
And then tell us about your upcoming book. As a journalist.
So the day that I went to visit Mike in prison, I remember I was really like a fish out of water. This was totally foreign to me. And I got my little pamphlet with Mike's prisoner number and my details on it, and this was my entry form. I didn't know where to go, so every time I'm just sitting there and I'm waiting for the next call for them to direct me where to go, because I don't know where to go in a prison. Mm. And eventually they told me, go down the steps and then continue until you cannot anymore. And I thought, this is very strange. And I was going underground, and I thought, this is so strange. And there was just something in me that there was a switch. And I said, you need to take absolutely everything in that you are seeing in this tunnel now. And in that moment, I knew I had to write the book. And it was so strange because it was just a moment. And so I started talking to Mike and started talking. So there was a family it was a father and 3 sons who were arrested. So 4 from one family. And the mother always sat in the dock. She was always there, Mini Pistorius. And I started talking to her after court. And so I started to basically understand the layers that came with this trial. And also, Mike once told me, he said, not all of us agree on politics. We don't agree on religion. We might not have the same, it was culture, religion, and politics. He said, we might not share all of those things, but there are certain things that we agree on. And that's when I discovered not all of these men are the same. Like, not all of them believe in the same religious aspects, but there was common ground. And it was just uncovering all of these different layers, that there was such a story that formed part of the Boeremag after so many years. And so I started writing the book in 2016, had it published in the US in 2019, and then I retained my rights after that. And now Penguin in South Africa is going to publish it. I've literally just submitted the final manuscript just a few days ago. And yes, we're looking at early next year, 2025.
Can you give us the title? That's the secret.
It is still a working title at this stage, so rather not.
We're looking forward to Karin's book, to tell us all about the trial and experiences, and to learn more just about these ordinary men.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Micki.
Thank you.